Good afternoon, everyone. Over the next 30 or 40 minutes, I hope I can introduce you to what I think is a really important and fascinating collection of oceanic art, and that is the Seaman Collection of New Guinea art. Many of you who are interested in oceanic art will have heard of Bruce Seaman. The collection is very well known and has been mentioned in many times over the last 50 years, and was part of a very significant exhibition at the National Gallery in Washington in 1979, which was a very spectacular exhibition on oceanic art. So from the early stages of the collection, it's been well known. Most people know about it, but very few people have seen the collection. And I must admit, I'm very lucky to have seen the collection both in the past and also in more recent times. For those of you who don't know very much about Bruce Seaman, I should just give you a few biographical notes. Bruce was born in 1926 and passed away in May 2022. He was 96 years of age. Unexpectedly, his wife, Ramin, died in October 22. When Bruce was in his latter years, we talked about doing a book on the collection. But it was really after his wife, Ramin, passed away that we really made a discussion with the family to actually proceed with a book on the collection to really demonstrate what an amazing collection it is and just pay homage to the family's enthusiasm for the collection and for the art. So Bruce was, as I said, born in 1926. His father was American and his mother was Australian. Unfortunately, Bruce's father died when Bruce was 3. And so Bruce and his younger brother were left without a father when they were very young, but they were supported by their American family. Bruce's grandfather was a very successful businessman in New York, and he was able to, with their support, have a very good education in Australia and later in America, where he studied engineering. So when Bruce was young, his mother took Bruce and his brother, and here we have Bruce Seaman and his younger brother Laurie with their mother Chrissy in America, visiting their American family in the early 1930s. Bruce, as I say, went to school in Australia and then joined the American Navy when he was 19. At the end of the Second World War, he studied engineering in America and became a civil engineer. In 1955, he traveled to Hawaii, and when he was there, he met Ramin, his future wife. And they courted for a period of 5 years and finally married in late 1960. And this is a photo taken of Bruce and Ramin in Bora Bora when they returned in 1961 to meet Ramin's family. They traveled for quite a few years. Bruce was supported, fortunately, by his American family and was able to indulge his interest in travel, art, and photography. And they've had 2 children in the late 60s. Their elder son, Terry, was born in 1965, and the younger son, Maui, was born in 1968. In 1967, Bruce decided to visit New Guinea because of his interest. He developed an interest during the 1960s in art, and particularly in oceanic art. And he went to New Guinea between 1967 and 1973 multiple times and collected a very significant collection of art. Here we have his 2 sons, Maui and Terry, with 2 agibas that Bruce had collected in the Papuan Gulf region. So when Bruce first started to go to New Guinea in 1967, he went initially to both the Papuan Gulf and also to the Sepik regions. And this is where he concentrated his collecting for a period of 6 years between 1967 and 1973. When going to the Papuan Gulf, he first went down to the island of Daru here, where he met George Craig. For those of you who have never heard of George Craig, he is an amazing character, still alive at 93. But when Bruce first went to New Guinea in 1967, George was a crocodile hunter and trader living in Daru. He had grown up in England, but had moved to Australia in the 50s and eventually to New Guinea in 1957. And he lived in the Papuan Gulf between 1957 and 1972 and worked as a crocodile hunter and trader. George is an amazing guy who is still absolutely passionate about art, particularly New Guinea art. And when he was in New Guinea in the Gulf, he developed a great rapport with the local people. And it was through that rapport that he really learned a lot about their art and became even more interested in the art. And when Bruce Seaman came to New Guinea, he met George. They became very good friends. But George helped him and guided him through the Papuan Gulf region. The other person that was very important to Bruce's time in the Papuan Gulf is a person called George Sr., who ran a trading station and also had some aircraft and a boat here in Kokori. And it was through John Sr. that Bruce hired a boat each time he came to the Papuan Gulf. This is the boat that Bruce used to travel around the Gulf every year for several years. It's called the Tomu, and he used it to travel extensively through the Gulf region. And obviously with the boat, he got into the major areas, but they also always had what we call in Australia a tinny, which is a flat boat, bottom aluminium boat that they would then use to get into the very, very narrow rivers that are very shallow. So Bruce traveled around this region and collected a lot of art. The important thing to appreciate is that when Bruce went to New Guinea, it was a very unique period. So as I mentioned, he was there between 1967 and 1973. And I think that the period from the early mid-1950s to the mid-1970s is what I would call the golden era for collecting New Guinea art. Obviously, magnificent collections were formed in the early part of the 20th century. But over the period of the next 50 years, there was a significant change in the way in which the Papua New Guineans lived. We have 2 world wars, which caused a lot of disruption. There was the development of the patrol system, where the patrol officers settled down a lot of the disputes and rivalry between tribes and areas. So it was much safer to travel around. At the same time, the missionaries were very active, and they actually created a big change in the culture there, with virtually 95, 97% of New Guineans now being Christian. So they lost interest in their culture. The place was much safer. And at the same time, prospectors and people in the mining industry came, roads were built and airstrips were developed. And so it was much easier and safer to travel around. So by the time that Bruce Seaman came to New Guinea in the late 1960s, it was a place where it was much safer to travel around. There was still a lot of art in the villages, but the locals had lost interest in their culture and were no longer following the old beliefs, and in many cases had abandoned the art in buildings and in huts. And it was there to be acquired by those who were brave enough to actually venture to New Guinea at that time. In the Papuan Gulf, this is a picture of Bruce with the local people here. It's a big river, but as you can see, they're using this very flat, small flat-bottom boat because even though they may appear to be quite big, the rivers are very shallow often. And Bruce would travel to very remote areas to look for art, and he would go back repeatedly over the years and make friends with the villagers. And this is one of the things that made a big difference for Bruce, in that because he was a very gentle, quiet person and because he was patient, he developed a rapport with the local people. And so even though they may not have been prepared to part with their art initially, over time, as they developed a rapport with him and they realized that he was very genuinely interested in the art, he was able to acquire pieces that otherwise could not be found or acquired by other dealers. This is a photo taken by Bruce of some ancestral figures in the Kiwai region. You can see the typical figure, or the typical appearance here of the Kiwai figures, with very long nose and the very long earlobes. The person in the background here has some charms, 2 bird figures and a figure. But it's interesting when you look at these photos, obviously this was a communal activity. The actual giving up of the objects was a communal thing. As you know, a lot of pieces in villages were owned by either multiple people or many families. And so it was actually not the decision of one person, but actually the decision of a group of people to part with something. And I think that this photograph helps to show how it was really a group decision to part with the art. The other thing I should mention is that in doing the book on the Seaman Collection, I have relied solely upon the photos that Bruce had in his collection when he went to New Guinea and that he acquired in New Guinea. And unfortunately, though, he wasn't very good at annotating them. And Bruce said to me many years ago, I didn't write on the back of the photos because I thought I would always remember where something was, where it was taken. Unfortunately, of course, with his passing, we've lost that contact and that information. So it's very hard sometimes to know exactly when and where a photograph was taken. And that has been part of the challenge in putting the book together and in doing the research, is trying to locate photos and trying to find some dates for those photos. After his time in the Papuan Gulf, Bruce spent a lot of time also in the Sepik region. And on each of his trips to New Guinea, and in some cases he went to New Guinea 3 or 4 times a year, he would go to both the Papuan Gulf and the Sepik region. A lot of his time was spent in the middle Sepik. As you can see here, we've got on the coastal area here, the Murik Lakes. We've got the Ramu River, the important Guam River branch here, and the other major rivers here, Uat River, Korowari, the Blackwater River, and the Hunstein Ranges here with the Chambria Lakes. These are all areas that Bruce visited and spent a lot of time looking for art in. Even though it was much safer at that time to travel around, it was still necessary to have, generally to be safe, to have a guard. A photograph here of Bruce with the guide and his rifle. As you can see, Bruce was a keen photographer. In researching the collection, it's been a wonderful experience to go through the photographs and the movie footage. Unfortunately, time has taken its toll, and not everything is in pristine condition, unfortunately. So as opposed to the Papuan Gulf, where the villages are all on the river, here in the Sepik River, oftentimes the villages were higher up, well away from the river. This is a village in the Korowari River region, and as you can see, the mountains are high and the village is up in the mountains with very deep valleys in between. And another village here in the Hunstein Ranges. I think that this is probably Bruce taken here with his typical hat that he used to wear while he was in the field. But again, you can see a very small village with only a few huts, but very isolated. Now, in doing the book and the research, I have been assisted by George Craig, who I say is still alive at 93. And George gave me wonderful information about the Papuan Gulf and his time with Bruce, and I've included that in the book. Wayne Heathcote, who is also a very famous name of New Guinea art, has also been extremely helpful. Wayne is still alive. He's, I think, about 80 years of age now, living in England. This is a wonderful photograph of Wayne with a fantastic Yipon figure. This Yipon is went to the Manil collection. And I love this photograph because it's a very early time when Wayne is still young, but this magnificent Yipon is being acquired, and the briefcase here is brought to bring the cash. And I think it's a wonderful photo that demonstrates so much of what went on in that time. In traveling in all parts of the river systems in New Guinea, it's important to appreciate that not all of the rivers are easily navigable. Here, even in the Sepik, they're needing to use a flat bottom boat to be able to get higher inland or further inland. And at times, even though the river may appear quite wide, it's very shallow. Here, the water is only just above ankle deep, and they're having to push the boat over the rocks. I mentioned before that Bruce was in New Guinea at a very unique time when there was a big transition and people really had a lost interest in their culture. Unfortunately, Bruce didn't keep many diaries, but I have found some diaries, and I've used those and included what I can in the book to give you an indication of where he went and what he found. And here we have a photograph taken with the Bahinamo people with a cult house. And here is a wonderful Gara mask that Bruce has just acquired. Now, in the particular diary entries for this visit, he mentions how the village had moved. And I think it's an important thing to actually make mention of the fact that we would think of villages and towns as being very stationary. And certainly that is the case in the highlands and probably in the any mountain areas. But certainly on some of the coastal areas, on the rivers, the villages would change frequently because of the movement of the river, and they would abandon their huts. And certainly when it came to this particular visit here to this village where Bruce found this wonderful Gara mask, these masks were still sitting on the wall of the hut that had been abandoned. They had built a new village a few hundred meters away. The old huts had been left and just completely abandoned with what was in it. And this reflects how really how the world had changed for New Guineans at the time. They really had lost connection with their culture and their art, and the art was just left on the walls of the huts. They had no interest in it. And in this day and age where people talk about colonialism and tribal art and so on, I think it's a very interesting thing to see the reality of what's gone on. The world has changed in many places, and people did lose interest in their culture and their art. And we've had a couple of exhibitions of New Guinea art opened in Australia by the Papua New Guinea High Commissioner. And in 2015, we had a great show at the National Gallery in Canberra, which put together by Crispin Houth, who many of you might know, on Sepik art. And the High Commissioner made a big point of mentioning at the time of the opening of the exhibition, what a wonderful opportunity it was for he and other New Guineans to come back and to be able to enjoy the art, which has been preserved by those who had collected it. And he acknowledged the fact that the world had changed and that many New Guineans had lost interest in their culture. But by those collectors, both in institutions and privately, who had actually acquired the art, this was allowing the art to be preserved and allowing it to be actually something that was available for everyone in the world, let alone those in New Guinea who wanted to come and see it, to be able to come back and learn more about their culture. This is a photograph taken at Ladagi, which is a remote rock shelter in the off the Moai River in the Karawari area. A similar photo to this was taken by Bruce, but a similar photo to this is actually in Kaufman's book and was taken in 1973, showing this rock shelter with these figures here. These are new, these are not old, as you can see. But this is a good example of the cave that a lot of the Karawari art was found in. Oftentimes when you read about Karawari art, you think of it as being in deep caves, hidden well away from the outside world. But the caves are often cave shelters more than deep caves, and this is a very good example of those. And here the figures are just left lined up against the rock surface of the wall here, protected from the rain, but not really protected from all of the elements. As you can see, there is some rain here in the background at the time of the photograph was taken. So Bruce would travel everywhere to look for art. And this is one of the things I think made it very distinctive about his collection. Both George Craig in the Papuan Gulf and Wayne Heathcote in the Sepik region both said to me how impressed they were with Bruce's enthusiasm to put up with discomfort and to travel remotely. He would go off in a small boat with a guide or two and maybe some assistance, and he would go as remotely as he could to try and find good art. I mentioned earlier that Bruce went back to many places and developed a rapport with the people. This is a photograph taken again with the Bahinamo people in the Hunstein Mountains, and it shows some photos that they're discussing. And the photos are actually images or photos of pieces that Bruce had previously collected. So it was through his repeated visits and patience and the good rapport that he developed with the people that he was able to find some amazing art that otherwise would have been impossible to locate, or impossible to actually even let the locals tell him about, because they would want to not trust someone who'd come in without any prior connection. Here we have 4 wonderful large Yipon figures. Again, it's a bit hard to be certain. I think this is likely to be a Kundaman village, but some great Yipons. It's been fascinating going through the archive and looking at the photos that were taken by Bruce, because I've found pieces that I just cannot place or have not seen since. So if anyone who is listening to this or who gets a copy of the book knows something more about some of the pieces or knows where they are now, please feel free to contact me, because I would love to help put some of the history together as to where these pieces have ended up. I mentioned before that I have used the photographs in Bruce's collection. Instead of taking any photos of new pieces or trying to actually do anything different, I've relied solely upon the archive that was available with the family that Bruce had left when he passed away. So some pieces, we're not quite sure whether Bruce acquired them and later sold them or exchanged them. But for instance, this piece, this female figure, ended up with John Freedy in the Jalika collection. The note that we are aware of in the Jalika collection is that it comes from the Kengleme River, but I am not certain as to whether Bruce actually acquired this piece. But it's a wonderful figure, and because of its importance, I've included the photograph with a couple of other photos as well in the book of pieces that we're really uncertain as to whether Bruce actually owned them, but he certainly took photos of them when he was in the field. This is also another fascinating photograph. We've got 3 Yipon figures being collected in the field and being carried through the bush. Again, I'd love to find these pieces. These are not in the Seaman collection. The photo is a wonderful photo of the collection, or of people collecting things, I should say. Whether they were acquired by Bruce, I am not certain. They're certainly not in the collection now, but I couldn't help but include the photograph in the book, because one of the fascinating things is the history of art and the history of art collecting and of the people involved with it. And it's wonderful to find an archive like this, which has all these exciting photographs of pieces and of people collecting. It's nice to be able to add a few facts to it. And again, if anyone has seen any of these pieces, please let me know. In addition to using the field photographs, the other thing that I did in putting the book together was to try and take some of the really exciting pieces and to actually turn it into some more artistic views of the pieces with a more artistic background. This is a wonderful Guam River mask, absolutely wonderful piece. I mentioned before when I was showing the map of Sepik region that the Guam River is a branch of the Ramu River. And this is one of 15 pieces that were part of the Seaman Collection, which went to the National Gallery of Art in Washington in 1979 and were part of the famous exhibition of the Art of the Pacific Islands. This is a truly wonderful piece. And as you can see, a wonderful age of patina. This is the Gara mask that I showed earlier when it was being field collected. Again, a wonderful piece, very distinctive, very unique, wonderful shape and form, and something which I've never seen anything like it ever before or since. Again, a very unique piece. This is a small double figure. Now, double figures from the lower Sepik region are very rare. As you can see with this piece, it's got a wonderful age of patina, wonderfully encrusted patina of age here, but a great piece that, as I say, is very, very rare. And this is the last piece that we have put into the gallery section of the book. This is an Iroquois figure. These are very rare. There's only a couple known. And Bruce didn't collect this. This was collected by George Craig in the Papuan Gulf. And in the book, I gave some details that were supplied to me by George. And he gives a wonderful story of when he was assisting an oil search group who were in the Papuan Gulf looking for oil. And he went to Mayakai village. And when he wasn't working, he would go and visit the villages and talk to the people. And in this particular village, there was a big abandoned hut. No one was in it. George wandered in, and to his amazement, he found this figure. Also, to his surprise, after he was gazing at the figure, someone came up, an old man came up to him, and it was obvious that he wanted to part with the figure. George still doesn't know whether it's because the old man was very old and wanted to part with it before he died, or whether it's because of some particular magical aspect of the figure that he wanted to part with, but he was very keen for George to take it. They agreed on a purchase price, and George then bought it. But it's interesting that when he was taking this figure out of the hut, the old man insisted that he can only be taken out face down because it still had power and magic. George acquired the piece, and it was in his collection for some time until purchased by Bruce Seaman. Bruce's collection, as I mentioned before, is very unique because really it's the only collection that still exists that it was put together by one person over 50 years ago. And certainly what's amazing is that it has been not just put together, but acquired in the field by the owner. And this makes it a very unique collection. The other aspect of the collection which makes it unique is the time in which it was collected. In those late 1960s and early 1970s, which was the end of that golden era that I mentioned before, with between the early 50s and 1970s, when there was the ability to travel around New Guinea in relative safety. Access was possible. The villagers had lost interest in their art, and it was possible to find amazing pieces that had otherwise just been sitting in huts and abandoned. So it's a very unique collection, and I hope you've found it interesting. I think it's still a fascinating collection with a lot more to still be found in it, and I'm happy to answer any questions people may have.